Headless guitars, you either love them or you hate them, but it's undeniable that they are playing an important role in the beautiful world of our favorite instrument, the guitars. Today I want to give you a brief excursion into the history of headless guitars, from the beginnings to where we are nowadays. Here we go. Hey Guitar Champion, what's going on? I'm 𝗚𝗚𝙦𝗚𝗚, back from my practice dojo, and welcome to today's video. Yes, I'm personally a huge fan of headless guitars. I think the aesthetic and the look is really great. I own a bunch of them, as you can see right here in the background, and I'm going to talk about these later a little bit more. But since I'm playing guitar and I'm interested in progressive metal kind of music, I'm also kind of intrigued and interested in headless guitars. And after doing a little bit of research, I found out that not only headless guitars are interesting, but also the history behind headless guitars. And I would say let's start right from the beginning. Receiving information about the first design or the first concept of headless guitars is not so easy actually. Well, there are, for example, lutes from the 17th century that are also headless, and where you tune your guitar on the body, because that is the main concept of a headless guitar. You lose the head and you took the tuning system and the tuning device onto the back of your body, or on the body itself. And when it comes to guitar, I read about a German engineer that has produced the first kind of patent for a headless guitar in 1936. His name was Otto Joseph Blahak, and I read about him in an article, but doing some research and even researching for the patent number, I couldn't find anything. Nothing. So of course I really doubt that this information is true. But throughout the 60s, more and more designs appeared that are a little bit more modern or weird or a little bit experimental, like for example Vincent Bell's design for an electro guitar. And even though this opened up the scene for a little bit more experimental and weird guitar designs, those weren't headless guitars. And I would say the first headless guitar, kind of headless guitar that we have was from Dave Bunker with his touch guitar. But being honest, this is not really a guitar. It's not a guitar that you're strumming. It's a guitar that you're touching, or let's say tapping. Tapping would be the right term in terms of technique nowadays for it. So this leads us, of course, to the first real guitar, which is also a guitar that you can strum and play like a regular guitar, which is headless. And this one is, of course, from the legendary Ned Steinberger. Steinberger, just for your information, it's not really important. I think it's quite funny later in the video, but Steinberger is the combination out of two German words. Stein, which means rock, and Bergerer, which you could probably translate to mountain, or like mountain wanderer, mountain climber. So it's something like rock mountaineer. Again, a little bit of fun fact, but interesting for a later moment in that video. So Ned Steinberger released his L2 bass in 1979, and that was the first bass without a head. He sold a bunch of them to a particular guitar store, and that guitar store sold those to some really big names in the scene, like for example John Entwistle from The Who, Tony Levin from King Crimson, or Andy West from The Dreads. Shortly after that, he also released the GL2, which is the guitar version of this bass. And those instruments, they received a lot of different kind of awards, like for example the Industrial Design whatever award from the Frankfurter Musikmesse. He received some plastic recovery kind of awards. So bunch of design and engineering kind of awards. And though in engineering wise, those guitars, they are really great. There's a famous story where either it was NAMM or Musikmesse here in Germany, where he took one of his guitar and he put one end on a chair and another end on a different chair. And then he said, okay, you can stand on those guitars because they are able to withstand a lot of force and a lot of pressure. So already here, engineering wise, Ned Steinberger definitely lived in the future. So the design, the engineering, and the whole kind of system that is in the GL2 was different back in the day. And even me, back 20 years ago when I was 15 years old, I was extremely interested, kind of intrigued with these kind of designs. So I got myself one. Well, not exactly Steinberger, but an extremely cheap copy of it, which is extremely dusty. I mean, this happens when you take your guitar and put it on the side, and then your cats quite enough live in those guitars. I haven't played this one for 15 years, I would say, and it is not really playable. You know, it was really cheap, but the tuners down here, they're not really tunable. That was a pain in the ass to get my first, you know, kind of real tuning, proper tuning out of it, to restring it and all these kind of things. The pickup there really cheap, so that's a really cheap copy from, what's the company name? H&K. It's not Heckler and Koch, by the way. It's something different, probably. So I'm thinking now, after hearing those stories, can this withstand the chair test as well? Let's find out. Kinda, I think. I'm too scared to let loose. You know, I have to say, I'm unfortunately way too scared to really stand on this with all of my weight and with all of my body weight. But yeah, let's better not waste any good material of a guitar, shall we? So I would say let's rather find out how this guitar sounds and not how stable it is. And therefore I discovered for you an old video from 2011 where 21-year-old Justin is trying to improvise over an Allen Holdsworth tune. Of course, it has to be Allen Holdsworth with this obscure headless guitar. So now but back to the real Steinberger guitars. In 1986 he released the GL3, and the GL3 had the trans-tram system in it as a bridge. And the trans-tram was a tremolo, as the name says, where you were able, oh hello Yngwie, huh? You would never play a headless guitar, right Yngwie? Yes? No? So that was a tram system there where you can bend a note with it and the tram still stays in tune. Back in the day you had really weird trams like the Kala tram and the first Floyd Rose kind of iteration and all the copies of them. And yeah, that was also a really interesting design, the trans-tram system, which is going to be really important later, but unfortunately never was really successful in their later iterations. 1 year after the GL3 was released, Steinberger was sold to Gibson. And for a lot of people, here the decline of popularity of headless guitar started to begin. I mean, Gibson never really was probably much interested in, you know, pushing those products. But let's stick a little bit with the history now with Ned Steinberger. In the mid-90s, he released the Spirit series, which was a little bit more of affordable kind of series, and the M series, which I absolutely liked from the design. It is a little bit more strut style, super strut style, but still headless. And especially, you know, back in the early days of YouTube, seeing videos of Brad Garsett or TJ Helmerich or an Irish guitar player that won a lot of contests back in the day, in the early days of YouTube, called Brian Espay. I saw videos from him and I absolutely fell in love with that design and with that kind of mixture out of traditional design with a strut kind of body, but also the modern kind of nerdy feeling with the headless on it. So in the late 2000s, Steinberger started to redesign the concept of the headless guitar a little bit, and they released the CT3 guitar, which has a little bit more kind of modern body, going away from that classic super strat style body, kind of in the spirit of the Parker Fly guitars and all these kind of modern guitars that appeared more and more in the 2000s. But I think the most important thing about the CT3 guitar is the new trans-tram tremolo. Because the cool thing with the trans-tram was that you can pull it up and it locked in that position, and by that you could pitch shift your guitar without a pitch shifter, which was extremely innovative, and I don't know why more guitars are trying to use these kind of things or this kind of system. When this guitar would have come out 10 years later, I assumed it would be much more popular because it was released just right before the new dawn, the new rise of the headless guitar. And I would say responsible for the new hype of headless guitars is this guy here, 𝙬𝙤𝙢𝙚. And now you remember where I said Steinberger is a combination of two German words, rock and mountain, or the mountaineer. Strandberg are also two German words, and Strand is the German word for beach, and Berg is also the German word for mountain. So that's probably the beach at the mountains. So you can sum up that these guys, they are all the mountains of top-tier innovative guitar engineering. Ola Strandberg hit the scene, and he revolutionized, or he restarted the hype for headless guitars with his really great design. And I have to tell you, in the early 2010s, I was absolutely in love with a Strandberg guitar. I desperately wanted one. I was looking for so many copies, cheap kind of things, because I couldn't afford any of those back in the day. I was like in my early 20s, and they were quite expensive back in the day. Nowadays they have more affordable kind of versions, but yeah, in their beginning, in the first time around, they were quite expensive. But you know, seeing all those videos from 𝙤𝙤𝙢𝙚𝙦, from Periphery, all these gent guys, from Pliny playing those guitars, I believe in me something happened that happened for a lot of kids back in that day. This kind of identification with not only the music, you know, this kind of progressive, really intellectual and intelligent kind of deep music, nerd music, if you want to call it like that. Music that don't get chicks, but who needs chicks when you can play guitar like those guys, you know? And during the 2010s, a lot more headless guitars appears on the scene, like Kiesel. And I even played the Vader, I believe, a little bit for a few days before I went to Ibanez in 2018. One of my students lent it to me just for a couple of days to test it out, and I really liked the playability and of course the look and the feel of that guitar. Everybody was doing headless guitars. Aristides, Ormsby had their crazy flying V headless guitar, for example. And it's been so crazy nowadays that even some other people start to make headless guitars out of their regular guitar. Like for example, my good buddy Kalen from 6-string guitar, he transformed his Les Paul into a headless Les Paul. So yeah, people, and I'm really happy to say that, they're digging more and more the look, the attitude and the style of a headless guitar. Everybody was doing headless, but not one specific company. A company that I started to join, a company that I absolutely loved, Ibanez. Everybody was waiting for the Ibanez headless guitar during the 2010s. And then I remember, and I now can say it because it's been a few years, but in 2019, oh no, wait, sorry, it was in 2020, January 2020, I drove to an Ibanez event together with an artist who has now also his Ibanez signature guitar. And we had a really long drive, 3.5 hours, and we were talking. He was coming from NAMM, but he told me, hey, Ibanez are going to release a headless guitar. And I was sitting in my car and was screaming like, finally they are going to release the fucking headless guitar, and was extremely excited. But still, I had to wait like 1.5 years, I believe, till they officially announced the Quest, the Ibanez Q series. And now we're going to take a look at some of the Quest that I have. So here are my 5 Quest guitars, 4 7-string guitars and 1 6-string guitar. I don't know all the names of them right now. QX7 BB-ST31, I don't know. If you want to know more about these guitars in particular, check the link that I have in the description box that will lead to my Thomann affiliate page. And there I have on my shredder side all the necessary information that, Ingi, what are you trying to do? All the necessary information that you need to know about those guitars. But I have a little bit of a story to tell. So this one was one of the first Ibanez headless that we've got, and especially this unit here, this piece of wood, was one of the 3 first Ibanez headless that ever appeared in Europe. And I can tell you, that's the one thing that I can tell, I am the first guy ever who have played an Ibanez headless guitar in a music video. And an Ibanez headless guitar live on stage. And then we have, for example, this one here, which also looks extremely stunning. I mean, take a look at this in the light. I really love the green of it that looks really beautiful, or blue, or however you want to see it. But here we have single coil pickups, we have regular frets, and oh, that neck. I mean, take a look at that beautiful neck right here. I love this kind of maple. Is it baked maple? I don't know right now, but this kind of really dark maple neck. Absolutely love it. And then, of course, we have that matte black 6-string version as well with the single coils, but we have a lot of different kind of sound combinations and variations with the toggle switch that we have here, 5-switch pickup selector. So also for the 6-string fans and those who are not necessarily in extreme metal, I recommend this as well. So now we talked about famous guitar companies and guitar series for headless guitars. I mean, nowadays everybody has headless guitars. Even Schecter have their new Sinister Gate signature, which is, in my opinion, a really cool looking headless guitar. I like that. Let's talk about some of the players who made headless guitars really famous, but also are extremely responsible for the, for some people bad, for some people good image of a headless guitar. And one of the first person who came into my head when it comes to headless guitars is, really extremely funnily, Van Halen. Somebody who's known for, that rock star image, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll image. He's playing a nerd guitar, like a headless guitar, but yes, he had played some of the Steinberger headless guitars. And then in the 80s, of course, especially with bassists, like I believe Level 42, that guy from The Police, and other bassists in funk, in jazz, not necessarily in metal, but especially in funk and jazz and fusion back in the day, they played headless basses. And headless guitars, we of course have Alan Holdsworth, for example, who is really famous for playing headless guitars. And I think here it started with this kind of nerd image that fusion players who are not rock and roll at all are playing these kind of headless guitars, and they are more famous in the fusion kind of math rock, progressive, jazz kind of genres. So that in the 90s, of course, this image, which I would say wasn't too popular as well in the 80s, I mean, it was definitely bigger than in the 90s, but it started to decline in the 90s. And there, in the 90s, dominated by Slash, who was playing his Gibson really down, not nerdy at all. Kurt Cobain with his Strat. John Frusciante with his Strat. Or like even in metal, you have players like Metallica with their ESP and their Gibson Explorer kind of guitars. Headless, nobody cared about headless. Well, not necessarily nobody. For example, take a look at Paul Masvidal from Death, or later Cynic, who still likes to play the headless guitar. Or as I've already mentioned, the fusion players, Brad Garsett, TJ Elmerick, they were all fans of the headless guitar. And then in the late 2000s and the early 2010s, again, the image of the headless guitar exploded, because I would say that the youth and that the kids nowadays and back in the day, they're more identify with less that sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of image from the 80s and from the 90s, which I personally also see it as well. I don't identify with sex, drugs, and rock and roll at all. I identify personally with melodic minor, Monster Energy, and technical death reggae. And then you got players like Tosin Abazin, Animals as Leaders, Plini, even Guthrie Govan played a headless guitar. All the famous players that are now really important for the current guitar scene, they played at a certain point a headless guitar, and that was extremely influential for the market and for the guitar as well. And nowadays, from what I've heard, is that headless guitars, they have their big comeback. And that was a short video about the history of headless guitar. I hope you liked this little video. If you like this video, feel free, consider subscribing, of course, to this channel for more shred education, and leave a like and a comment. Let me know if you are a fan of headless guitars, and if yes, what would be your dream headless guitar? So much about that. I wish you a lot of fun learning, practicing, and mastering the guitar. Cheers and power your progress. Bye.